Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 6th week of our COVID-19 Power Lunch Twice Weekly series, where we discuss new developments and new legislation related to the coronavirus pandemic. As a quick reminder, if you have anything specific you would like us to address or cover, please email us at info@jmco.com. As a reminder, my name is Erin Spivak, and I'm the moderator for the series. Today with me, we have returning Mike Sibley, our resident subject matter expert on the PPP loan program. And on the menu today is the latest related to the loan forgiveness. The SBA actually released guidance on Friday night related to what you will have to submit for loan forgiveness. Mike, did this answer all of our questions?
Hi, Erin. I wish it did. It did confirm a few things for us and actually elaborated on a few questions that we did have. So it did add some clarity, but unfortunately, there's still a number of questions that we have, and I'm expecting that there's going to be, again, continued guidance that comes out, clarifying some of the things that I'm sure once everybody gets a chance to go through this application, that they'll have the same questions.
Now, I thought the same thing, that they actually addressed quite a few things and left some things silent, which might be a good part of this. Mm-hmm. Of course, it wasn't a one-page form, right? So it was pretty lengthy. And I know that we're going to cover in detail how to fill out this form and the different calculations later this week with an on-demand webinar that we'll be emailing about. But until we get into that detail, what's kind of a high-level view that you can go over with us?
Sure, yeah, I think getting started on a high level is a good place to be, so that way anybody who's received the loan can start thinking about this in a little different way. Some of the things that were clarified, first and foremost, was just dealing with payroll in this covered period. It did confirm that the covered period begins when you receive the loan proceeds, but I, like probably you have, received many questions. Okay, I've received my loan on a Monday or on a Wednesday, let's say, and my first payroll is this Friday. Does that count towards the PPP, or does it wait? And fortunately, the guidance gave us two options. The first is that, yes, we can say that that first payroll that you paid 2 days after you receive it can be included as part of the PPP loan. Or if you're bi-weekly or more frequent, you can say, I'm going to wait, make this election to wait until the beginning of the next payroll period. So let's just say that's the following Monday. That, for payroll purposes, will begin your 8 weeks of covered. They call it an alternative. And as you mentioned, this isn't just a quick one-page application. There's the application, there's a worksheet, and then there's a detailed worksheet if you don't have the right payroll reports. And I think most are going to need this worksheet when you get into some of the details. But first and foremost, having that clarity over payroll is really key. Now, what this alludes to is that if you're paying your first payroll and including as part of the PPP, that means some of that payroll is actually incurred prior to the date of the loan. So does that mean any wages that were unpaid at that point in time can count towards the PPP? That's not clear, but that's what it seems to be alluding to on the payroll side of things. So that guidance, I assume, is maybe they're just going to leave it generic because it does apply that way, and perhaps we're overthinking that piece of it because it does say paid or incurred. It doesn't get into how you deal with bonuses or bonuses. It just doesn't get into that granular detail. It just talks about being paid and incurred. And the same thing with, we've talked a lot about pension plans, pension contributions, those accruals from 2019 for profit sharing. It doesn't get into whether that's included or not. It just says paid for those. And again, the same thing with healthcare. When you get into the non-payroll but eligible costs, we've talked about that: mortgage interest, rent, utilities. It did confirm that those have to be in place by February 15th. You must have agreements in place. So, for those with rents and leases, make sure you have copies of those lease agreements that show it was in place by February 15th. What was really interesting, though, is they said rent or lease for real or personal property, which means really equipment rentals, as an example, fall into those leases. So that expands that thought process quite a bit. They didn't provide any guidance as to what transportation means under utilities, but utilities is all the basic gas, electric, water, telephone, internet access, and transportation. So we'll probably get a little bit more guidance there. So those are kind of high level, give us, just to kind of summarize again, we know our payroll periods that we can use. We've got an alternative payroll calculation we can use to simplify it, and frankly, it might extend it out, another week or two that we actually can apply for the payroll piece. However, the non-payroll pieces are stuck to that same covered period, beginning when you get to the loans. The other nice thing is it's paid or incurred on the non-eligible piece. I mean, on the non-payroll but eligible. In other words, even if you've incurred the electric costs and you haven't paid that bill yet, if you paid it by the next billing cycle after that 8-week period, it still counts. Right. So it's a pretty interesting, I think, change in what we were actually thinking, because we were thinking it had to be paid during that time, and how would you deal with this? Mm-hmm. And of course, as you said, we're going to go through a much more detailed calculation to show how this works and flows, but I just want to get people thinking at this point about the differences that have come out.
Mike, I think it's really interesting that they decided to include real and personal property for leases and interest. One thing to note, of course, is that those had to be in place as of February 15th. So you can't go out and get an equipment lease to help fill that 25% bucket of loan proceeds today, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And we've heard a lot of questions about leases, and of course, I've had clients say, "Hey, I'm actually going to be entering into a new lease. Does that count?" And of course, you're exactly right. It's got to be in place as of February 15th. And again, you've got to have something. The documentation requirements are included in the loan application for forgiveness, and they're pretty extensive. You have to show that these things were in place, that you were paying them before all of this started, and you're continuing to incur those costs up until, through the 8-week period. So it's going to be important that this documentation exists. And I do want to step back for a second on the payroll. One of the questions that was floating around a lot is it all or nothing on this 75%? And what became clear is no, it's not all or nothing. It's going to take your payroll costs, and it's got several different calculations that we'll go through again later this week in our later on webinar. But it does take your payroll and it does divide it by 75% to gross up to your top number. And that top number less your payroll costs will be that 25%. Of course, it's gonna change depending on, you've got some of these FTE reductions, potentially some salary reductions. So there's a number of things that come into it. But the good news is it's not all or nothing. So there will be pieces that are forgiven, which is a relief for a lot. I know there was a lot of talk out there about companies unwilling to even spend the proceeds because they were worried about spending it and then not having it forgiven. Well, this, I think, also provides some relief from that standpoint as well.
No, that definitely does. And I know last week, one of the frequently asked questions that came out confirmed that if you got a loan less than $2 million, they're not going to audit you, right? So they did confirm that even in this loan forgiveness form, there's a box you actually have to check. Was my loan $2 million or more? So obviously you wouldn't want to check that if it wasn't.
Yes, be very careful about checking that box, obviously, because you don't need to add any more attention to yourself, certainly, by checking that box.
Definitely not. Although it is important to note, it does $2 million or more for affiliates. So if you have separate companies that applied for it, but they are under the affiliated rules, you would qualify and have to check that box for the more than $2 million. So let's kind of pivot to real quick. I know we can't go into the details, but it did provide in this loan forgiveness form some guidance on safe harbors for FTEs and the reduction in employee payroll costs. At a real high level, can you kind of cover those?
Right, yeah. So again, one of the things that we've been trying to understand is how the FTE piece is going to work and how the salary piece is going to work. On the FTE side of things, we do know that an FTE is based on a 40-hour equivalent. So there's some pieces in there to calculate what your FTEs are. And there's some simplified math in there, which we'll go through. If there is a reduction in FTEs over certain periods that are defined in the application, and again, previously in the law, there is a safe harbor that effectively, if you restore that by June 30th, that piece can go away. There's a number of calculations that go into that, so we'll go into that in more detail. Again, on the salary reduction side of things, so there was two components. There's a reduction for FTE reductions, then there's the potential reduction if someone's salary decreased by more than 25%. And this is a by employee calculation. However, if there was a reduction during this period of time and it's restored by this June 30th date, there is a safe harbor to get around that reduction, so it won't apply against you. So there are things that are out there. There's a couple pieces. It gets a little bit complicated in the math to make sure you're using all the right dates and the calculations and things like that. So we'll certainly be going more into detail on those, but it is welcome relief. And of course, the other piece that everybody was worried about, what happens if an employee doesn't come back, that we had to furlough? Well, there was guidance that came out that said, well, if you made a written offer to them and they declined the offer, then they won't count against you for that purpose. Well, they also expanded that to say if an employee is terminated for cause, or if an employee voluntarily resigns or voluntarily reduces their hours, there's also a safe harbor for that, so that way it doesn't count against you. It's an exception that doesn't count against you. So there's multiple pieces in here that did answer some of our questions and give us a little bit of relief from that worry, because those are some of the things that people were very, very worried about.
Well, for sure, because a lot of times, we had clients who would call and say, hey, this person hasn't shown up for work or decided to quit. How in the world am I going to replace them within the next couple of weeks and have that not hurt me on my loan forgiveness side? So that did provide a lot of relief for this. And it'll be, again, interesting to kind of go through the calculations and show people what they have to do to make sure they meet these different types of safe harbors. And hopefully by within the next couple of weeks, they'll clarify some of these, I assume, on the frequently asked questions, or maybe put out another interim rule related to the loan forgiveness. So with that, I think we're going to kind of wrap up. And Mike, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just for everybody, they need to continue on the documentation side of things. Certainly take a look at the application, and one of the pages goes through in detail what they're going to be requiring for documentation. I've been encouraging all along in each of these weeks to maintain as you go. When you pay a payroll, make sure you have that documentation. When you pay a utility bill, maintain it. It'll be easier towards the end. So I would suggest going through that. I am still receiving a number of questions for people who are not in operations necessarily, or not in full operations and not wanting to bring people back. And what do? At this point, the way the rules are written, the time period starts when it starts, right? As we talked about with that covered period. There is talk in the Senate of extending the 8 weeks, but again, that's only talk, and I don't know at this point if and when that will apply. So it is possible that even the rules we have now are not only going to be clarified, they could be changed.
We'll stay fluid with all of these, correct? Is it's the rule until it's not, right?
Exactly.
So with that, we look forward to seeing you guys on our next webinar that we will be sending out an email, and it will also be posted on our website of when that will be available. We expect later this week to have it live. Because of that, we won't have our normal Friday power lunch because we expect that our PPP loan forgiveness webinar will be pretty lengthy as we go through the forms and help you guys calculate that. But again, if you aren't receiving our emails, or if you happen to miss it, just check our website, and we are going to make it an on-demand webinar so you can watch it whenever is convenient for you. If you ever have any questions, just email us at info@jmco.com. And as a reminder to check our website, jmco.com, we have a COVID-19 resource center where we update our links, blogs, and articles constantly to give you the most up-to-date information that we have. As Mike mentioned, it's constantly changing, so we don't want anything too stale out there. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.